But I am your host, Nancy Charles. Ricky Alexander has moved on to greener pastures, and so I have been given the responsibility to fill in those big shoes of Ricky in hosting your weekly Wednesday program. And so tonight we're just going to vibe. It's not going to be a constituency vibe, but I think it's just going to be a vibe tonight with Nancy Charles. So I hope tonight you will sit down, you will relax, and you will enjoy our talk this evening. My intention is to ensure that I provide you with the facts, I provide you with information to satisfy your curiosity. I know there are lots of things that are being said out there, and sometimes as our viewing public, you are a bit confused, you're not too sure who is correct, which information is right or not. And so my intention over the next couple of weeks as I vibe with you is to provide you with facts and information that you would be able to sit and analyze and perhaps make the right decision. So thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you so much to our online viewers. I know we are streaming live on many Facebook pages. We have a lot of supporters who are watching and who are viewing tonight. We have persons who are out there in the diaspora who's been online waiting for the program to start. I do apologize. We're still thrashing everything out and ensuring that we can fine-tune it. And hopefully next week we can have an 8 o'clock prompt start. But tonight, nevertheless, you are here. You're still waiting. Thank you for your patience. And I'm hoping that it's going to be worth your while and worth your wait. This evening, St. Lucia, I thought last week when we spoke, I got a lot of feedback from you, and thank you so much for that feedback in terms of the information that was presented with reference to our budgeting, our finances, our borrowings, and what is it exactly that government uses the money that it has the responsibility or the charge of to do, and how it benefits you, ordinary St. Lucian. I got a lot of feedback and calls from you, messages as well, that it was very informative, that you learned a lot. And so I'm hoping this evening as well that you will be informed and that you will learn a lot. That's the intention. I thought it was important because I've been getting a lot of messages from persons, and even sometimes as I browse through social media, a lot of misinformation with reference to the government and to the COVID response of the government, where a lot of people continue to say that the government has not done anything for anybody with reference to COVID. And I know sometimes, you know, the old people say, "Mem, when nous coûte nous pas, depuis nous manger, ek nous aller au toilette, nous ka oublier qu'il est quitté ba nous manger." And sometimes that is the reality. Sometimes the reality is that we have forgotten in terms of what has transpired. Sometimes because now we are a little bit more settled, some of us are a little bit okay now, and we may have forgotten the challenges that we faced some time ago. And so I thought that it would be important to maybe just give you a gentle reminder of where we were at a year, just a little over a year ago, what transpired, what is it that your government had and did and put in place to ensure that we could be where we're at today. It was certainly a journey. It was not anything easy. And so, St. Lucia, I think tonight I would like you to get a greater appreciation of the hard-working men and women, not only in the cabinet of ministers, but tonight I perhaps would like to speak a little bit about the hard-working men and women within the public service, within the various public sector agencies. And in particular, there's this little crew called the Command Center that you will hear a little bit more about tonight in terms of our COVID response. In preparing for tonight, I know that COVID has been it's a challenge for every single world leader because maybe a lot of them had never experienced such a pandemic. It's not that this is the first pandemic, but most of them had not experienced managing such a pandemic. And certainly, St. Lucia, I think we would all appreciate that all over the world, leaders were just feeling their way. It's like you're walking in the dark and you're just feeling your way, and there's a tendency to bump into something. There's a tendency to touch something that you shouldn't, and there's a tendency to make mistake, but all in an effort to ensure that you can find your way to that light bulb, to turn on the light and to see what is happening. And so this is what the world was experiencing sometime last year. Some countries, as you would be aware of, are still into different phases of the pandemic. Places like India has been suffering for a while now with another wave. You watch the television and you see what is happening, and you pray to God and you say, thank God that I am living in St. Lucia, and that my government has been able to manage the pandemic as such that we're not in a position as to where India and maybe lots of other countries within the region. For example, in Trinidad is still under lockdown, even Canada is still under lockdown, but yet still in St. Lucia, whilst we may be under a state of emergency with a curfew from 9 o'clock, we are not under lockdown. We are still free to move about, and we have some semblance of normalcy is being returning to our St. Lucian society. But I wanted to read in opening this evening something that someone sent to me, and I think it was very apt for tonight. And so I will read it to you. These are not my words. These are the words of someone, as I said, who sent this to me. So I'm going to read it to you to begin our program tonight. And he says, encourage people to think carefully about the state of our nation. We have essentially been closed down as an economy for nearly a year and a half, both from tourism point of view, as well as internally. Shops, bars, restaurants, gatherings, parties, boat rides, beach limes, church, funerals, Christmas, Easter, and all the things that make us human and enjoyed prior to February 2020. This system of lockdown has essentially enabled us to prevent the virus from spreading as aggressively as it has in countries like Iran early in the pandemic and India, which is currently crisis country. We have artificially managed to keep coronavirus under control and reopen some sections of our economy, like resort tourism, while villa tourism and restaurants remain closed to tourism. At some point in the not too distant future, our government is going to have to lift the state of emergency that artificially protects those who have not yet gotten the virus and who are not yet vaccinated. We have been lucky enough to date on our small island to be able to control the spread of coronavirus, but the experience of other countries where the virus has taken hold before they have managed to vaccinate their population has been very different. Public care health systems have been overrun, and the virus has left thousands dead in its wake, like Brazil just a few weeks ago. This is not merely conjecture. This has happened multiple times and continues to happen globally. Our single defense and strategy that will enable us to join the modern world again safely as an open society is for us to be vaccinated. And that is why the message Recover St. Lucia is exactly what it is. It relies upon our collective effort to vaccinate as a nation. Critical, St. Lucia. And I said to this person, I am fully vaccinated, and I am very proud of the fact that I have taken both of my vaccines and that I am fully vaccinated. I am hoping tonight that we will get to the point and we will understand the need for us to vaccinate, the need for us to make that personal decision, because it is a personal decision. But I am hoping that perhaps if I tweak your memory a little bit, because I can guarantee you, if perhaps around either May last year, we had a virus, majority, if not all of the, we had the vaccine, majority, if not all of the population of St. Lucia, because of the situation at the time, would have gone for the vaccine. But again, because the situation has lulled to a certain extent, we have returned to some state of normalcy, people think that everything is calm and it's okay, then you have a lot of resistance. We get a lot of information, whether some of them are true, some of them are false, and a lot of us are making that decision whether we vaccinate or not based on this calm or the so-called calm that we are going through. But what we fail to realize that if we do not vaccinate, the calm will not last for long. And the state of emergency, the curfew, some of the pleasures and some of the things that we readily enjoy, unless we collectively come together as a nation and to vaccinate, we will not get back to that point. And so maybe I thought tonight, tweaking your memory, perhaps getting you to remember how this all started, where we were, what transpired, will give you a greater appreciation of the efforts of the government in getting us to the point where we're at, and that you would be able to make up your mind and say, now it's my turn. The government has done what they needed to do. The various public and private sector agencies have done what they needed to do. Now it is my turn to do what I have to do to ensure the safety and the security of my country. And so last year, the World Health Organization reported the emergence of a new strain of coronavirus on January 9th, 2020 in Wuhan, the Hubei province of China. There were a lot of information as to where it originated from. I think initially the reports we got was that it was transferred in a market in China via bat and some bat soup, etc. There's a lot of information contrary to that to date. Nothing substantive, but we know that it originated in China. The virus was linked to a respiratory tract infection and illnesses ranging from the common cold to more severe diseases such as Middle East respiratory syndrome and severe acute respiratory syndrome. The signs of infection, and those of you who perhaps have had it or seen your loved ones who have it will tell you that some of the signs included respiratory symptom, fever, cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, and in severe cases, as most or some of us know here in St. Lucia, it develops into pneumonia and may develop severe respiratory syndrome and eventual death. Initial evidence suggested that person-to-person transmission of the virus was limited. However, by January 21st, the virus was characterized as highly contagious, and it had spread to at least 10 other countries outside of China. The WHO constituted the outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern, and later on, they declared it a pandemic. Now, although the risk level for the Caribbean sub-region at that time was classified as low, I want you to remember that the government of St. Lucia was monitoring this development very closely through the Department of Health and Wellness, and decided to update its existing influenza preparedness plans just in case. And so we were not taking any chances in St. Lucia. You know, like the old people say nuki dene pion da damla nuki plipiti ek no has have leba ela ka even dile say nuka point pligo plok. And so the government of St. Lucia started, as the people say, point duva avant duva point. And so we decided to update our existing influenza preparedness plans. The plan included the education and sensitization of health workers, non-health stakeholders and the general public, the enhancement of the port health services, active surveillance of high-risk institutions, namely port of entries and hotels, the prompt recognition strategies, high index of surveillance for travelers with recent history of visits to China and other affected countries, ensuring the isolation of ill cases in designated hospital isolation ward, establishing diagnostic capacity through the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CAFRA, and facilitating contact tracing and quarantine of suspected cases. On the 1st of March, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Honorable Alan Chasney, and the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmar George, attended a special meeting of CARICOM in Barbados to discuss the global threat of COVID-19. Yes, that's the famous meeting, St. Lucia, that was being touted that the Prime Minister did not attend. He refused to attend, but we all know otherwise because there were pictures and everything and videos to show that both the Prime Minister and Dr. Sharon Belma-George did attend that special CARICOM meeting in Barbados to discuss the global threat of COVID-19. And so from January, February, your government was being proactive by monitoring and putting certain measures in place in preparation for what was going to unfold later on. The World Health Organization reported confirmation of a case of coronavirus, the first case in the Caribbean region, in the Dominican Republic on the 1st of March. That very same day, we got our first reported cases within our Caribbean region, and that was in the Dominican Republic. Several other countries in the Caribbean, including St. Martin, St. Barth, and Martinique, they followed, and so you started having cases within the region. St. Lucia, in preparing, recorded its first case of this virus on March 13th, 2020. So let's look at the timelines. St. Lucia, let's remember the timelines as to what is happening. The first case was a 63-year-old woman with a travel history from the United Kingdom. This triggered immediate implementation of the plan, thankfully, because of the thoughtfulness of the government and the Ministry of Health. The plan was updated, and so the plan was quickly put into action to ensure a series of preventative measures to aim at reducing the spread of the virus. On March 23rd, there was a declaration of a state of emergency, and I thought that it would have been important to print it because listening to over the last couple of days the arguments and the discussion with reference to a state of emergency, one would swear that this is the first time St. Lucia has been placed under a state of emergency. One would think that we're not used to it, or we don't know what a state of emergency is like anymore. And so the discussion seemed to be around a state of emergency. But as far back as the 23rd of March, I have in my hand here the St. Lucia Government Gazette, Volume 189, Issue 10, Monday, March 23rd, 2020. And this was published printed by National Printing Corporation, and by His Excellency the Governor General, a proclamation, Sir Emmanuel Neville Snack, Governor General, and it says, whereas it is enacted by Section 17 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, that the Governor General may, by proclamation, which shall be published in the Official Gazette, declare that a state of emergency exists for the purposes of Chapter 1 of the Constitution, and it went on to list what this is. And so it says, therefore, I, Emmanuel Neville Snack, Governor General of St. Lucia, by this proclamation do hereby declare that a state of emergency exists for the purposes of Chapter 1 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 1.01, that I am satisfied that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of COVID-19, an infectious disease, 2019 infectious disease commonly known as COVID-19. So, St. Lucia, this was the first proclamation by the Governor General on Monday, March 23rd, of a state of emergency. And subsequent to that proclamation, there was a suspension of non-essential commercial activities, cancellation of all mass crowd events, a curfew from 8 to 5 p.m., and the closure of the country's airport. And so, from March 23rd, we closed our borders. Nevertheless, despite these measures, on March 29th, St. Lucia recorded its first instance of local transmission among 6 new confirmed cases with a reported 300 persons under supervised quarantine. As a result, the country was shut down, with all persons confined to their homes on a 24-hour mandatory curfew from April 1st to April 8th. And so I did as well print the emergency powers COVID-19 curfew number 3 order, which speaks to a curfew being imposed, and I don't think St. Lucians will forget that day when the Prime Minister announced that a curfew was being imposed every day. It was a 24-hour curfew. St. Lucia, we were on lockdown from 5 a.m. on the first day of April to 5 a.m. on the 8th day of April 2020. That is what you call D-Day. That's what a lot of people remember as D-Day when we were on the lockdown. But I want you to understand and to appreciate that the decision had to be taken. A decision had to be taken to ensure that we minimize the spread or the community spread of COVID-19. Because at the time, while St. Lucia was in a state of preparedness, I don't believe it is fair to say that St. Lucia was fully ready for the impact of COVID-19. And so this was a measure to mitigate the spread and the impact of those new cases that had been recorded. Later on, after the 1st of April, St. Lucia moved into a partial shutdown through to April 26, 2020. And during the partial shutdown, St. Lucia, you would remember, we allowed supermarkets, mini-marts, and bakeries to reopen for a limited time. A 10-hour curfew from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. was implemented, permitting essential businesses to operate, including hardware and home supply stores. The government of St. Lucia responded quickly to contain the virus and to mitigate the negative impacts on each sector of the economy, as well as the most vulnerable groups. And so the approach to COVID-19, to our COVID-19 response, it was a three-pronged approach. There was phase 1, which speaks to our public health response. We had phase 2. Phase 2 spoke to our social stabilization plan, which was launched on April 29. And phase 3 included our economic recovery and resilience plan. So there was always a plan. St. Lucia approached COVID-19 response with phase 1, public health response, which included strengthening the public health system, that is creating quarantine and isolation facilities, procuring PPP and ventilators. I don't know if you remember the issue when everybody was crying, do we have sufficient ventilators? And at the time, the whole world was sourcing ventilators. I can tell you an experience that we had where the government of St. Lucia had procured or paid for, I think, about 6 ventilators with a company in a particular country. And when the ventilators were ready to be shipped, that company indicated that we had to pay them double the price of the ventilators that we had paid for if we wanted the ventilators to be shipped. And no matter what we did, they would not renege on this because there was a grab and go, a hoarding of ventilators, if you want to call it that. The bigger countries were willing to pay top dollar. The smaller countries, you had to be begging for it, and I think St. Lucia eventually we even got a refund for those ventilators. We never got the ventilators. So it was madness out there, and we were like a little fish in a big pond, and it was the big fish eating up the little fish. It's every man see for himself, and St. Lucia was swimming in that pond as well, and we were trying our best to ensure that we secure our population, we protect St. Lucia and St. Lucians, and we protect the lives of St. Lucians, and that was our first response. We instituted border closures, curfews, state of emergency, school closures. These measures were successful at the time in keeping community spread to a minimal and ensuring that we had 100% recovery on our infection rate. On the first day of April, day one of the lockdown, we had a team at NEMO who was put together. At the time, we were not called the command center. It was a team of men and women that the cabinet had put together to sort of oversee and to coordinate the activities, because the country was in a lockdown, and it was felt that you needed to have a team of persons to be able to give guidance, to look at the various issues, to meet with the various sectors, and to look at how do we approach this thing, because this was a first, as I said to you, St. Lucia. The team came to NEMO, put together the list of grocery items based on what NEMO would normally prepare, and to create care packages for the vulnerable. I'm sure we would appreciate that because you had the country on lockdown, everybody was closed at home. A lot of families perhaps did not have time to prepare and to ensure that they had sufficient either grocery items or food items within their homes. And you also had those vulnerable people who perhaps didn't have anything anyway, and you needed to ensure as a caring government that you provided for them. And so NEMO used the community disaster groups that they would normally engage in for distribution, and within that 8-day period, a little over 10,000 packages were delivered over that 8-day period. And I can tell you it was a little over 10,000 packages because we ordered 10,000 bags, grocery bags, but throughout the time period during the 8-day period, the needs became more and more, and so we got more bags and more bags. So for sure, I can tell you it was more than 10,000 packages, and I can tell you that for a fact because I was integrally involved in assisting and for us ensuring that there was equitable distribution throughout the constituencies of those care packages, and to ensure that it got to those who needed it most. On April 8th, 2020, a social stabilization program was developed to aid people who had become unemployed as a result of the pandemic, providing them with both a financial stipend and a monthly food hamper. An economic support package was also developed to assist affected small business. Now, I'm telling you some of the dates, St. Lucia, because I really want you to get a greater appreciation that whilst a lot of things were happening externally, and you may have seen things happening externally, you may have heard certain criticisms and certain things that people felt should have been done was not done, I want you to appreciate that internally things were happening. There was coordination happening. You had a team of people who were coordinating and putting things together, looking at the bigger picture. How do we move forward? What do we do on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4 to ensure at the end of the day that you didn't have a bigger disaster than COVID-19 on your hands. I'm sure you would remember Minister for External Affairs, Honorable Sarah Ford-Beaubrin, announced that we were attempting to repatriate St. Lucians who were stranded abroad, both in the United States, Canada, and wherever they were at, even within the Caribbean region. You had a lot of St. Lucians who had gone either for vacation. And I also want to remind you that the closure of the borders was not specific only to St. Lucia. What you had happening was that you had countries like the US and Canada, and even within the region, who had also closed their borders. And so what you found was that you had St. Lucians who had tickets to return home, whilst the borders, whilst we were willing to have them come home, sometimes the borders of the countries that they were at were closed. And so you had a lot of negotiation happening, which is why the Minister for External Affairs had to get involved, because then you now have a lot of negotiations happening, trying to bring your people together in one space, giving them information so that you can coordinate the flights and the arrival of your St. Lucian nationals who are stuck abroad. Some of them went for sickness, some of them had surgery, some of them were at school, they had finished school and they were returning home. Some people were on vacation. Whatever the reasons they were, you needed to ensure that you could repatriate your people. And so there was extensive effort by the government of St. Lucia with governments all over the world to try to repatriate our St. Lucian citizens. I'm sure as well some of you would remember we had a lot of our St. Lucians who were working on the cruise ship and they were stranded at sea because some of the ports in the various countries, while the ports were operational, the ports were not open to passenger and to cruise ship passengers. And so you had our St. Lucian workers who were all over the world. I think we had some as far as Dubai, you know, who were stranded. They were sending messages home to their friends and to their families. They want to come home, and we need to find a way to bring them home. And so all of these activities were happening whilst we were managing what was happening locally in St. Lucia. We also had to manage our people who were stranded overseas. And so kudos to the government of St. Lucia and the Minister for External Affairs who got involved, and it was extensive over a period of time to negotiate and to bring back our people. Even in Martinique, I think we had quite a few St. Lucians who were in Martinique as well. And they were also getting ready to come back home. And we had to make arrangements to ensure that they were coming back. Martinique had a few more cases than St. Lucia, and so we needed to ensure that we were protecting our St. Lucian citizens when our people were coming back from Martinique. At the same time, while all this was happening, you also had the government negotiating with hotels. So we had about 5 hotels eventually to use as quarantine facilities. Starfish was the first facility that we negotiated for. And I'm sure some of you would remember that the first set of repatriated St. Lucians were 95 St. Lucians who were returning home from Martinique. You would remember the bus, it was a news item, and it was the first for a lot of people. When people got there, some people did not want to stay in the quarantine facility. People who had their babies with them, they wanted to go home. You had elderly people. It was heart-wrenching for some, but at the end of the day, you just knew that you were doing the right thing. The government was doing the right thing in ensuring and trying to protect our St. Lucians. And so whilst it was difficult, you break down, you saw some people and they really wanted to go home, you really had to grit it in and say, listen, we're doing this not only for the benefits of St. Lucian, we're doing this for your benefit as well. So we need you to remain in quarantine, get tested. If nothing happens, then you can go home. I have to say as well, thanks to the government of St. Lucia in negotiating, when we looked at, or when we saw, whether it's the truth, I'm not too sure, but when we saw what the quarantine facilities for some of the other countries in the region were, St. Lucians were in hotels. We were getting fed 3 times a day. They had AC, they had television, they had Wi-Fi, etc. Some of the quarantine facilities in some of the countries in the region at the time were schools, and you saw persons on beds on the floor, persons lying down on benches, etc. And so St. Lucians were privileged to a certain extent because the Prime Minister was insistent. I mean, it's not that the idea or the suggestion to use schools did not come up in St. Lucia, but I clearly remember the Prime Minister say we need to treat people with dignity. We need to ensure that our people are coming home to comfort. These are our people, these are our nationals, and whilst it's expensive, it's going to cost us a bit, we need to ensure that we can treat our St. Lucian nationals with dignity and due care. And so St. Lucians never had to go to a quarantine facility in a school where you had to lie down on the floor or on benches. Thankfully, we were able to house all our returning nationals, both for quarantine and for isolation, at proper facilities where they got proper care, they were managed, and so forth. So we are very grateful to the government of St. Lucia for its vision and its foresight and its care for its people in ensuring that these facilities were up to international standards for our returning nationals. And on April 21st, we had a few nationals who were repatriated from a Norwegian cruise line. And as the month continued, you just had a lot of our people just coming home in bits and pieces, However, to further restrict the entry of COVID-19 into the St. Lucian Society, bans were placed on non-nationals with a travel history to China. I'm sure you would remember that. That persons who were non-nationals with a travel history to China and any returning national to the island with a similar travel history was automatically placed in mandatory quarantine for 14 days. Now, in preparing our healthcare system for COVID-19. Whilst all this is happening, COVID-19 is unfolding, people are coming home, people want to come home, etc., you have to ensure that as a country, you take the necessary measures, you put things in place, because the situation, as you would appreciate, is not going to stay the same. We're not going to stay with 1 case and 5 cases and 12 cases. You would arguably understand, as more of your nationals return, you would expect that they would be returning with the virus, because it's not like we were immune to the virus from like anybody else. And so in preparing our healthcare system for COVID-19, some measures that were taken were, one, to aid with the prompt identification of persons who fit the definition, respiratory clinics were set up across the island, allowing persons experiencing flu-like symptoms to get free care, free testing at. We set up respiratory clinics at the Grosile Polyclinic, the Leclerc Wellness Center, the Dennery Hospital, the Soufre Hospital, and the Viewfort Wellness Center. And setting up those respiratory clinics also was a way to ensure that you didn't have people traveling and cross-contaminating. So if you're from Viewfort and the respiratory clinic is in Dennery, that you have to travel all the way from Viewfort and go up to Dennery, or even go up to perhaps Grosile or to VH. And so setting up those respiratory clinics ensured that St. Lucians could stay as close to home as possible, limit your traveling. I'm sure some of us remember the 758 and 759. It was not in an effort to divide St. Lucia. It was just in an effort to help curb the movement of St. Lucia. Because St. Lucia, I'm sure you know by now that COVID-19 does not travel in the air. You don't just catch it from the air. It travels with human. It travels from human to human. So as we travel, as we interact with people, as we move from place to place, we carry the virus with us and we transmit the virus to people that we get into contact with. And so limiting the movement of people is one of the key ways of curbing the virus. And so that's why at the time we had the 758 and the 759. Some of you loved it so well. We had songs and we had different governments. It was, I think it showed the creativity of St. Lucians to adjust to a situation and perhaps to just make a little fun out of it so that we could get over what was happening at the time. A 311 hotline was set up to provide general information on COVID-19, and some of you would remember that. In fact, the hotline at one point in time, when I think it was on the first day of the lockdown, that the hotline crashed. Because so many people were calling that hotline, and we had to immediately bring in additional staff. We had to get additional phones, additional phone lines. Thankfully, we got the support of some of our call centers who were operating. They had some of their staff who were working from home that they made available to us, and some of the equipment that they made available to us as well, to get the hotline back up and running. But it was a very, very critical time, and St. Lucians needed information. And so the vision of the government at the time was to ensure that St. Lucians were not kept in the dark. A lot of the persons on the hotline, it was last minute, but we trained them as best as possible. And whatever it is you asked that they did not know, they would find the answer for you and get back to you. So it was a critical time, and I know that the service and the support of the 311 hotline was very much appreciated by the members of the public. The hotline was available 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to midnight daily. Another measure that was taken is to establish, as I said before, quarantine and isolation sites. We had 5 hotels on island to help alleviate the burden of our healthcare system. And St. Lucia would appreciate that if we didn't have those quarantine sites and everybody had to either go to VH if they were not feeling well or something like that, you would have had an overwhelming of our healthcare system. And this is what we were trying to avoid, and so the government had to ensure that we put alternative things in place to ensure that we didn't crash our healthcare system. I am very grateful to the men and women within our healthcare system. I'm grateful to God as well that at no point in time did we have a crash of our healthcare system. St. Lucians, as they say, we can knock on wood that everything went well. We had our challenges. There were times when it was very difficult. There were times when our doctors and nurses had to be working back-to-back shifts. Some of them didn't get to go home, and some of them were even scared as well, which is understandable that they were dealing with those cases, and some of them didn't want to go home because you were not too sure if you had been in contact or not, and you didn't want to bring anything home to your family. And so we St. Lucia, we owe a debt of gratitude to the men and women at our frontline workers per se, who had been there from day one and still continue to be there to this day. With the global outbreak of COVID-19 threatening our economic, social, health, and overall well-being of all countries, the government of St. Lucia accelerated the move to OKEU Hospital while reserving the Victoria Hospital as a respiratory medical facility. And so all non-COVID related cases will go to OKEU. And some of you would remember, OKEU was closed. We were preparing for the transition. We had put a lot of things in place in preparing for the transition. And COVID-19 accelerated that. And so a lot of people asked and said, well, since the day they should have just moved into the hospital, look, now they just moved. But it was a strategic, we had been over a year planning and putting things in place for the transition of OKEU. There was a lot of work throughout the year prior to COVID that had gone into putting together that transition plan. A lot of work had happened. We had help from the French authorities. Some of you who work at OKEU will remember the meetings we've had and the different site visits and the assistance we got. So it was not something that was done overnight. There was a lot of work that had been done prior. And so when COVID-19 came along, and the government recognized the impact that it would have on our healthcare system, it was decided that we transition into OKEU as soon as possible and to use Victoria Hospital as a respiratory medical facility. I think, to my recollection, that this is the only country who's had a hospital separate and apart to work and to act as a respiratory hospital. And so that measure was necessary to reduce overcrowding at our hospitals, to limit exposure to persons infected. And St. Lucia, it is still up and running. And I can tell you that the cost is not limited, because right now we are running 3 hospitals in St. Lucia. Victoria Hospital is still a fully functional hospital as a respiratory hospital. It has a lot of the equipment, the nurses, the doctors, the ventilators, the cleaners, etc., etc. So there is a cost to running Victoria Hospital as a respiratory clinic as well. And so you have OKEU running, you have VH running, and you have St. Jude's running. And in the meantime, you still have the polyclinic running. You have Soufriere Hospital to a certain extent running, and you have Denry Hospital as well. So you have a healthcare system that is well integrated, and a lot of challenges and cost, I can definitely tell you, that incurred in running those facilities. To ensure the health and safety of our healthcare and frontline workers, the St. Lucia government provided extensive training to our medical doctors, nurses, community health workers. We just did not want them to go out into the field naked. They needed to be covered, and the coverage, the best coverage that you could have given to them, was training. Educational campaigns were set up to sensitize the public on the crucial services provided and how to address the level of discrimination and stigma towards our health professionals. I'm sure some of you would remember the stories of some of our healthcare professionals who left work. Some of them were in their uniform. They were discriminated against. The bus drivers didn't want them to board, or some of them board buses and people were complaining. Some of them had to get down, etc., etc. And so we had to embark on an extensive campaign to speak to people to stop the discrimination and the stigma towards those same healthcare professionals who have and were there for us. Another gap that was identified in the healthcare system was that of our human resource capacity. And so St. Lucia reached out to Cuba. Very early o'clock, we recognized that we will be needing help to manage. So All these measures that we have undertaken is a proactive government, is a proactive system that has been put in place, that was put in place to ensure that the government was preparing, that the health system was preparing, and that it was ready for whatever shock that was going to come its way. And so we had 113 medical professionals, thanks to the government and the people of Cuba who came to St. Lucia to aid in the fight against this pandemic. And notwithstanding, Cuba had their own challenges. Cuba was battling with the pandemic at the time, but the government of St. Lucia, of Cuba, still saw it fit to assist St. Lucia. We are friends, and perhaps by now we're family as well. And we got the assistance from Cuba. Being cognizant of the international spread of COVID-19, with the endorsement of our Prime Minister, the Department of Health and Wellness sourced equipment to facilitate COVID-19 testing on island. I'm sure you remember that very early during the pandemic, our testing was being done at the lab in with CAFRA, and so the government of St. Lucia started putting things in place to enhance our capacity and to ensure that we could do on-island testing. We had a little bit touch and go at some point in time, but we always had the support of CAFRA to help to validate and to ensure what we were doing was right. And once we got it right, it was full swing. We were doing full-time in-country testing up to this day. And also, the World Bank activated $10.5 million to support our COVID response. And I can tell you, majority of these funds were used to strengthen and to address the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. Most of the funds went towards the support and rehabilitation of Victoria Hospital and other medical facilities. That was the end of phase one. Phase one was ensuring that we put things in place to save the life, the livelihood, the health of our nation. Phase two, we always had a plan, St. Lucia. Phase two. Phase two was the Social Stabilization Plan, which was launched on April 29th. Now, prior to COVID-19, the St. Lucian economy was projected to continue along its growth path. We had been having economic growth since 2016, since this government came into office. The economy was forecasted to grow at about 3.2% in 2020, building on the growth of the previous years. It was supported by solid tourism-related activities. However, our preemptive actions locally had a dual impact in decimating our economy. Remember, St. Lucia, we had to close our borders. We had to close, nobody came in. We were just facilitating St. Lucians who wanted to come home, and we were facilitating visitors who were stranded in St. Lucia in repatriating them back to their home. We did not have visitors coming into St. Lucia, I think, until July, whether it was the early July or mid-July. So you would appreciate having your borders closed from March, April, May, June, July, what the impact of that would be. The impact was also felt on our ports, our freight operations, that whilst even though the ports were open, because of the importation of items globally, and you had shutdowns globally happening all around the world, it was difficult to source whatever materials that were needed. And so that also created a lag in shipping and so forth, and cargo coming into the country. So you had limited cargo coming in, and that also affected our revenue. I'm sure you would appreciate. The agricultural sector also experienced declines, both in production and in markets, due to the shutdown of the tourism sector. A lot of our farmers, I'm sure the Ministry of Agriculture has said that time and time again, that we do not consume enough of what our farmers produce for our farmers to be fully dependent on the consumption of the local market. And so a great aspect of consumption is dependent on the tourism sector. However, good news. the government of St. Lucia sought to provide support. We recognize the impact of the closure. We recognize the impact of the pandemic on various sectors and various people within the sector. And so the government moved very quickly to institute an income support with the NIC. And I'm sure you will remember that they had to go to Parliament to make amendments to the NIC Act, because the NIC Act does not facilitate an income support. And so an amendment had to be made to allow the NIC to be able to provide income support to its members. Non-NIC contributors. So we had a huge percentage of our population who are self-employed. They are non-NIC contributors, taxi drivers, small shop bar owners, persons employed in the tourism sector, musicians, persons providing support or services to carnival, vendors, you know, a whole bunch of people within our society are non-NIC contributors. And the government could not leave them stranded. And so it was important to ensure that you can provide some sort of support for those persons. I'm very glad to say that a lot of persons participated, they applied for the support, and they did get the support. And for a period of 3 months, they received $1,500. Combined, you had over 18,000 persons who benefited from both the NIC and non-NIC income support. The government of St. Lucia also provided direct support by way of distribution of hot meals on a weekly basis to vulnerable households. And so during the period of April 12th to May 31st, so right after we had the lockdown, when we slightly reopened to allow supermarkets and shop and small businesses to continue doing business, you still had the curfew in place. It was recognized that you still had our vulnerable groups out there and that we needed to ensure that we could feed them. So after the distribution of the over 10,000 care packages, the next phase of taking care of them was the distribution of hot meals on a weekly basis to those vulnerable households. And thanks very much to the SLHTA, who said, listen, we have our kitchens are open, we have no guests, we can use our kitchens, we have our chef, and they contributed. We didn't have to pay the chefs. They contributed. Their contribution was the use of the kitchen and the payment of the staff to be able to come in, and they purchased the produce from the farmers. You would appreciate, because the farmers now did not have a ready market in terms of the hotel. The meals were constructed in such a way that it would make use of locally produced and locally grown food items, and so that started creating a market for the farmers to be able to get their produce sold, to provide those hot meals to needy families in St. Lucia. And so during the period of April 12th to May 31st, a total of about 18,000 hot meals were delivered with the assistance of the SLHTA, NEMO, who did the coordination, and the Cadet Corps, the St. Lucia Cadet Corps. These are a whole bunch of men, hard-working men and women. Boy, I saw them at work during the time of preparing the care packages at NEMO and delivering those meals. They are very committed. I have to say thank you very much to them for the level of commitment and support. And those hot meals were delivered throughout the length and breadth of St. Lucia. But once that aspect of the hot meal ended in May, the government went on to provide another set of support. And so, St. Lucia, I want you to appreciate that it was from one to the next. We tried as much as possible. The government tried to ensure that you did not leave your vulnerable out too long. You didn't leave them out without any form of support, but you needed to make sure that you take care of them, as I said, because you did not want to create another social tragedy. And that's what you're trying to avoid. You have a pandemic. You do not want to have another tragedy to deal with that pandemic. And so once the aspect of the hot meals program ended, the government went on to provide raw food packages to over 1,000 households around the island every week. So every week you had about 1,000 boxes of food being packaged. It was packaged by the St. Lucia Marketing Board, and included in those packages were locally grown foods. You had sweet potatoes, you had dasheen, pumpkin, whatever food was available at the time. You had fruits, you had mangoes, you had bananas, vegetables, you had eggs in there, and you had fish and chicken in there. So we ensured that it was a full meal and that persons would be able to have food or access to food for the entire week to take care of their families. And St. Lucians were very appreciative. The level of support, the messages, the calls that we got in St. Lucian saying thank you so much, because both my husband and I, due to COVID, they were probably employed within the hotel sector. They were unemployed, and they were able to get that steady supply of food to be able to take care of their family. The farmers themselves were also very appreciative, as I said, because this was a market that was created for the farmers. So we wanted to guarantee that at least 99%, I can tell you maybe one or two things. There was some seasoning, maybe garlic and onion that was included in there. That's not locally grown, but at least mostly everything else was locally grown, locally produced, and locally procured from our farmers to ensure that whatever it is that they had planted and that was ready for harvesting, that there was a market to be able to sell their produce. So all of that, St. Lucia, created some sort of economic activity. It meant that the farmers would now have some form of income, a little bit of money coming into their pocket to be able to buy and to purchase basic goods that they need. And it meant that the people who didn't have money, who were now unemployed as a result of COVID-19, now had access to food. So it was each one helping one. The government also worked in collaboration with the utility companies, banking, and other financial institutions. I'm sure those of us who participated in the banking and financial institutions support. These included waivers and moratoriums on bank mortgages and repayments, both the principal and the interest, for individuals and entities for a period of 6 months initially, and that was also supported by the ECCB. There was a suspension of all rent payments for 6 months for persons who were occupying government-owned commercial units. There was a provision of direct support to local indigenous farmers to sustain their livelihoods, amongst other things. And so the government provided the social stabilization plan, the package of support to increase productivity through the provision of inputs, fertilizers, seedlings, etc. to our farmers, also to our fishermen. I know our fishermen got support as well. And the government further pledged financial support to the sector through an infusion of $1 million in the National Fair Trade. So St. Lucia, this was not a government that was inactive. This was a government and a team who was very active, who were proactive, and who was always looking for ways and means as to how do we ensure that we can keep our St. Lucian, our country going, our economy going, and how do we ensure we can continue to provide for our people. I think we will be taking a little break in a while before we go into phase 3. So as we get ready to go into a big break for phase 3, I just want to remind you as well, in addition to all what had happened, the government also developed a strong buy local campaign. And that buy local campaign was geared towards reducing our importation bill, facilitating diversification, spurring investment in our local enterprise, and fostering greater consumption and assisting in generating some level of employment. Now, I know I have given you a lot of food for thought. Last week, somebody sent me a WhatsApp message and said to me, while you were talking, I was writing and I was taking notes. So, St. Lucia, I hope that whilst I was talking, some of you were taking notes, you were writing down. We'll take a break right now, and then after the break, we'll go into phase 3, and I will open the lines as well. If there is anything perhaps I may have missed that you wish to remind me of, or if there are any questions or anything you wish to ask with reference to our COVID response as we go into phase 3 and prepare for our vaccination drive, you can feel free to do that. So we'll take a commercial break right now, and we'll be right back.
We're happy that Mr. Birch will be able to serve us to the extent and serve us very well, which I see to myself that's someone that will be able to work for us.
Mr. Birch, I am wishing you the best of luck in the upcoming election. We love you, we are there with you, we are supporting you. And what can I say? I wish the United Workers' Party all the best in that election.
Thank you, Butch. Thank you, my Prime Minister. We all love you.
Yeah.
You have a vision. God give it to you.
Yes.
And you is the best Prime Minister we ever get in St. Lucia.
Yes.
Thank you.
We've moved security from 112 to 119 million. We've moved youth and sports from 4.7 million to 7.1 million, and that does not include the money at NLA. We've moved equity from 54 million to 62 million, and we've moved agriculture from 25 million to 28 million. Mr. Speaker, this is where the money has gone. We have not backed down from our responsibilities to the people of this country, and no, we ever will, because we have an ambition to build a new St. Lucia for everyone in this country.
Hi everyone, I'm Amira Sere and I'm a student at the Monipo Pasias Combined School. I'm in grade 6 and my teacher is Miss Stanislas. My favorite subject would be math. I don't normally like it, but my teacher makes it finds a way to make it fun. I also love the positive quote she put up all over the walls. It reminds me to keep going. Also, the new wing is very impressive. The balcony is very large. So at break time, I can eat my snack and, go for a nice little walk. I also like the size of the classroom, so I'm not sticking on anybody because, 6 feet apart. Before, it was a rocky ride coming to school when I normally take the bus. But now, the drivers don't have any complaints now that the district rep fixed it. Before, it was like a rocky, stony road. The road, but now that they fixed it with some concrete and nice tools, it's a smooth ride. I may even fall asleep. Thank you, Dr. Rigobert.
If you keep it up, you cannot never lose. You will never lose if you keep on doing what you're doing there to support us, because we'll always support him.
I appreciate what the minister doing. It's a good thing. See the work you put in on there, I appreciate that. I like that. That's nice.
Woman, I'm going on. Yeah, back to work.
So where do you have to Don't mind them, they can't take down our guy. So that man pass Mr. Guy straight in? Yeah. Why don't I do that?
Which guy? What guy? That guy? Mr. Guy?
Hey, Georgia! I tell you, that man can't take down our guy.
You cannot do that. We already asked him to do it for us and Guy that give it to us. All of us eating our bread thanks to Mr. Guy. Joachim coming and trying to scandalize us.
So we today coming there.
I asked that man in front of everybody down there if he couldn't get that little job, the same little job he say Guy giving us. If he couldn't get it for us, he tell me that's TFA and you didn't get it for us. You come up here 3 times before Guy. Huh? So TFA you couldn't get it for us. But as Guy give it to us, you have a problem, you want to come and bribe us. It could worth 78 point something million dollars. We don't care. We still accepting the $150 we get for our day. Thank you to Guy. We're not too big and we're not too tough, but when we work together, we got the right stuff. Go, Mr. Guy, yay!
Welcome back, St. Lucia. I'm sure you can see me smiling. We love the ending of that ad. I really love the ending of the ad. It reminds me when we were little children, and you used to say, "Yeah, go, Mr. Guy." So we love that ad. Okay, St. Lucia, we will be opening up our lines now as we go into phase 3 of our economic recovery. My technician is experiencing some technical difficulties in terms of some of what I wanted him to put on the screen to show you tonight. So perhaps you may find that I'm doing a little bit of reading and that is because some of the information that we really wanted to put on the screen so that you could see and to detail a little bit more, he's not able to do it right now, and so I would have to be reading from the information that I have. But I'm getting your messages, and some of you are saying very informative. Some people have been saying to me, I didn't even remember that the government did all of that. I didn't remember that we had done all that work, etc. And so at the end of the day, I think St. Lucia, maybe it was a little bit important for us to remind you of the workload and what the government of St. Lucia had done and has done to get us to where we're at. When we look at some of our neighboring islands, as I said, some of them are still in critical situations. Some of them still do not have that level of relaxed atmosphere that we have in St. Lucia. Some countries are still under full lockdown, and so we are very grateful because of the preemptive actions of the government of St. Lucia that we are where we're at today, and the level of support that the government of St. Lucia has and continues to provide to St. Lucians, in spite of the fact that the government's income has been severely challenged. But the team at the Ministry of Health, the Cabinet of Ministers, the team at the Ministry of Finance, they have been working throughout to ensure at the end of the day that we can provide an economic recovery package that will ensure that we do not wreak too much havoc on our economy. And so Phase 3 St. Lucia included the Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. Now, I reminded you and I told you about the command center. And that was a team of men and women that was put together to assist in the management of COVID, in making recommendations, looking at the facts, the specifics, etc., and making recommendations to the Cabinet of Ministers for eventual implementation. And I can remember clearly when the grouping started. As I said, we were not called the command center initially. It started with a team, a small team that was put together by the Cabinet of Ministers that included the former permanent secretary, current permanent secretary, former and current commissioner of police. You had the head of the delivery unit, myself. You had Minister of Tourism, Minister Fede, who was leading the charge, the PS of Health, and the CMO, and everything to this day. The command center met every single day from March 23rd or thereabout, and met every single day at 8:30 to this day. In the initial stages, the command center met Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every single day. And I can remember the first time that we got a day off was Mother's Day, when Minister Fede indicated that we had been working hard every single day, meeting at 8:30, putting together the framework to recovery, to reopen, to assist, etc. And he gave us the day off on Mother's Day, and he said, listen guys, you all can take the day off on Mother's Day. And then subsequent to that, we met a couple of months. Then when it came to Father's Day, we got some time off, and after Father's Day, by June, St. Lucia, remember that we had full recovery. We had very little, if zero, cases, and so we were not meeting on Saturdays and Sundays anymore, and so we were meeting Mondays to Fridays. But up to a day like today, I can tell you that the command center has grown. In fact, I brought with me the legislation in the COVID Prevention and Control Act, where Parliament more or less endorsed and put in place the establishment of the command center. And it says here in section part 1 on the administration, there is established a body to be known as the command center. The functions of the command center is to serve as an advisory body to cabinet on matters relating to COVID-19, to have oversight of activities required to reduce or prevent the spread of COVID-19. The composition of the command center would be, the command center comprises a Minister of Cabinet as the chairperson, and that would be Minister Dominic Fede, who's the chairperson. He's done a tremendous and amazing job in leading that team. Every single member on that committee would tell you that Minister Fede has shown excellent leadership in leading the command center. The Chief Medical Officer as the Deputy Chairperson, a representative from the Office of the Prime Minister, a Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Tourism, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Health, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Finance, the Commissioner of Police, or his or her designate, a representative from NEMO, a representative from the St. Lucia Tourism Authority, and the Principal Information Officer of the Government Information Service, or his or her designate. The members of the command center shall be appointed by Cabinet on terms and conditions as determined by Cabinet. And so it speaks to that command center coming together, meeting, and advising the Cabinet of Ministers. Now, I had a nice little chat that I really wanted to show you, but apparently you're not able to see it on the screen. But I wanted you to get an appreciation as to the command center and when we meet and in putting together on preparing the presentation to present to the Cabinet of Ministers. So what the command center or the team would do is to meet based on what is happening and what is the policy position that needs to be taken by the Cabinet of Ministers. Sometimes the Cabinet of Ministers will say, this is what we're thinking of doing, how would that impact various sectors? We would meet with the sectors, the command center would make assessments, you would meet with as many agents or agencies as possible, and put together an assessment and make a recommendation to the Cabinet of Ministers based on that meeting. The Cabinet of Ministers would obviously sit down and based on the Cabinet of Ministers would sit down, they would review the recommendations made by the command center. They would look at it with maybe another fine-tooth comb, and they would determine whether or not that they should accept or amend the recommendations. And sometimes we had a lot of back and forth with the Cabinet of Ministers who would make other recommendations. Maybe they would have another perspective that was not taken into consideration, and you would have that level of discourse that you had to go back to the drawing board and come back again, all in ensuring that you make the right decision. So what I'm holding in my hand and I wanted to show you is something called the Framework to Reopen St. Lucia's Society, assessment by the Command Center, and that was one of the presentations we made to the Cabinet of Ministers on the 14th of May 2020. So St. Lucia, as far back as May 2020, the command center had started deliberation and a framework to reopen St. Lucia's economy. And so we were planning, we were preparing, we were putting triggers in place, we were looking at what would happen if this happened, what are you going to do if that happened, etc., looking at the statistics, looking at our numbers, looking at where we are in terms of our PPE. The command center took into consideration every single aspect of COVID management before making a recommendation to the Cabinet of Ministers in trying to assess and come to a conclusion as to what happened. So that was a team, and that is the team that continues to this day to advise the Cabinet of Ministers. And once the Cabinet of Ministers has taken on the advice and it needs a policy position to be implemented, the next phase would be to call for a NEMAC meeting, a wide NEMAC meeting, where the presentations would be made, and then the NEMAC gathering would either accept or make further recommendations before the Cabinet of Ministers finalize the decision. And so it is a process, St. Lucia, you would appreciate that. It's not something that you just woke up one morning and say, hey, let's do this. It is something that you went through. It's a process that you went through and that you deliberated on to ensure that you would make the right decision. So as I said, we'll open the line. So if you wish to call, and if you wish to ask any question or if you have any comments based on the presentation that I have made or I'm making here tonight, you are welcome to call and to share your experience. Also tonight, St. Lucia, we need to get to the point where, as I said, that the government of St. Lucia has done their part as much as possible. This is our time, and it's time for us to do our part. I know that a lot of St. Lucians have concerns with reference to vaccination and taking the vaccine, but as I read in my preamble, the only way we can fully reopen our economy. We can fully reopen our tourism sector. We can fully reopen our school, because right now you still have the school on a rotation system. The only way we can fully reopen our bus system so that the drivers can have their full 15 passengers is if we collectively come together and recognize that we're dealing with a global pandemic and that we need to come together to get some sort of herd immunity. That as St. Lucians, we need to come together and we need to take the vaccine. So if you have concerns, perhaps tonight is a time for you to share what your concerns are. Why is it that you choose not to take the vaccine? Why is it that you think you do not need to take the vaccine? Why are you afraid of taking the vaccine? Or if you are fully vaccinated, perhaps you can call and you can encourage someone to say, I took the vaccine and this is why I took the vaccine. This is why I'm doing it. And so perhaps that may change somebody's mind in terms of saying, well, I'm going to take the vaccine or not. All right, so feel free to call. Our phase 3 included, as I said, a plan gearing to providing support to the business sector through credit and liquidity support, as well as supporting poor and vulnerable households. It was very important that as we move into our third phase, to reopening gradually our economy. You would appreciate in July, we started having our visitors coming back. It was a gradual process. They were not allowed on tours, etc. They were not allowed to rent vehicles and to drive around. So you also had the car rental sector that was being impacted. So whilst you had visitors, they were allowed to stay within, a confined space. You still didn't have that full opening. And so the phase 4 is geared at providing support to the business sector through credit and liquidity support. And the Honorable Prime Minister allocated $5.1 million in tangible benefits towards the poor and the vulnerable citizens who have been financially affected by COVID-19, as well as hotel and tourism employees who are currently unemployed. These benefits included expansion of the number of poor households on St. Lucia's Public Assistance Program. I think we have a... Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling the Vibes. Thank you for vibing with me tonight. Hello.
Bonsoir.
Good evening.
Bonsoir, madame.
Mwekatanou?
Vous comprenez?
Oui, mwekatanou.
Ok. Moi, je me une question.
Oui.
À votre vaccin.
Mais ma vaccine expert, moi pour vacciner, mais pas mon question quoi mais ça répond hein?
Oui, mais regardez-moi. Si moi ni vie d'argent dedans, moi est-ce que ça prend un vaccin?
Moi attends chay moun demander question ça et moi attend CMO et puis ces gens health la dit ou ça point vaccin. Il pas qu'à affecter ça en pièce. So ou ça point. Et puis moi quand il est important pour point aussi c'est ça qui te ka empêcher au point et si c'est ça peut-être ou tenir un petit peu ouais ça dit donc pour pas point ou ça point because moi attends ça qui fait moi do ça moi ça Nakuto
moi ça moi ni vie d'argent et puis ma si moi point ici qui affecté moi
il pas affecté ou il pas affecté ou c'est gens
parce que moi ça mon qui était à vie d'argent il va à l'hôpital qui va injection et puis moi
oui mais changer injection yo ka pour là yo à l'hôpital là et injection vaccine c'est deux différents injections peut-être c'est moun là qui aller l'hôpital là yo té malade et yo ba yo injection pour maladie yo té nia et peut-être injection n'a pas de ka aller puis ça qui a dit dans yo mais vaccine c'est un bail qui bien safe c'est un bail qui bien simple c'est pas un bail ko c'est différent oui med ça là so comment cadeau moi attendre chay moun me des questions ça là et puis ces gens health la dit oui ou ça point peut-être si là ni un moun qui ka couille soit qui ni vidage en dedans et qui a point vacciné qui pas fait rien peut-être yo ça couille et puis assurer ou dat qui yo point vacciné et puis you all right. Quand on ka coûter moi les phone ben on ka coûter moi les TV a.
Merci pour ça. Ngai gadi pour vaccine ma présent.
Oui, allez pour vacciner. Mene famille, mene madame, mene issue, mene maman, you ti issue. Tout le monde qui ni l'âge pour point, mene yo encourage yo. Koka kuye from, I say from Vieux-Fort ebe Paside Kasri.
Okay.
Okay, color boss way.
Akastri.
Okay, well, usa ale Darren Sami, yoka buy vaccine at Darren Sami cricket ground, and yoka also buy vaccine VG Sports Complex.
Merci.
Right. Thank you, caller. Thank you for asking that question. I have heard that question being asked before. Even persons who had tattoos were concerned that if I have a tattoo and I take the vaccine, will that affect me? And again, I'm not a healthcare professional, but I've heard that question being asked before of the healthcare professionals, and their response has been that it is very safe, that even if you have a tattoo, you can still take the vaccine. It's still very safe. So if at this point in time you're listening and because you have a tattoo or any other thing and you're not too sure, of course it's important to ask your healthcare provider. If you're not too sure about something that is going on with you, you have a pre-existing condition and you have a little bit of a concern, call your doctor, go to the health center, get some information, but do not stay home and decide and determine that you're not taking the vaccine just because you don't know. Find the right information and let that information guide you. Okay, and so as I was saying that the benefits included an expansion of the number of the poor households on the St. Lucia Public Assistance Program. So on the St. Lucia Assistance Program, we had a total, a little over 2,600 households on that public assistance. And I can tell you, St. Lucia, daily you get requests of persons who wish to be on that assistance program. We have another call. Let me just take this call. Good evening, caller. Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? I'm not sure why we can't hear the caller, but caller, are you sure you have your mic on? I think we're experiencing some difficulty with this caller. Yeah, it says the caller. Okay, sorry, caller. We'll check it and maybe you can call again. But I certainly couldn't hear you. I don't know if you could hear me, but certainly I couldn't hear you. So our technician will come and see if there's anything wrong with the phone. But again, as I was saying, we have another call. Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? So our technician will come and see if there's anything wrong with the phone. But again, caller, I can hear your television playing. So can you bring down the volume on your television, please?
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, I was just calling about the tattoo. I have tattoos and I took both doses of my vaccine.
Okay, so you have a tattoo and you took both doses, and how do you feel?
No, no way.
Okay. Did you have any side effect when you took any of the vaccines? Did you have any fever or anything?
Well, fever, no.
Okay.
But I'm complications. But I was feeling some pain. But I didn't know whether it's the vaccine.
Right.
When I went to the doctor, they tell me no, it wasn't the vaccine that was causing the pain.
Okay.
But I had both doses.
All right. So thank you so much for that testimony, caller. So persons who are out there, I'm sure they would appreciate persons who are out there who perhaps have a tattoo.
Because when I asked the nurse, I told her I had tattoos. She told me, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me.
Can I ask you, caller, did you have any reservations in taking the vaccine at any point in time prior to you going and take the vaccine?
No.
Okay, that's very good. All right. So I'm happy and I'm very pleased.
Where I'm working, I work on the airport, so I have to protect myself.
Yes. And I think that is the message, caller, that we would want all St. Lucians to understand, that taking the vaccine is protecting yourself, whilst you may be doing it for your family, but first and foremost is for you.
I think all St. Lucians should take the vaccine.
Yeah.
Because all what they hear in the rumors about the vaccine is this, the vaccine is that, I don't think that. I think it's politics they're playing, and right now you barely hear anything.
Yes, I think it's unfortunate. I think last week I did mention that I think it's rather unfortunate that there is not sufficient, there is a level of politics, and maybe it's understandable because, as they say, we are in the silly season, but I really don't think that there is sufficient being done, especially by the opposition parliamentarian, in enforcing not only the protocols but the vaccination drive, encouraging St. Lucians to go out and get vaccinated, encouraging St. Lucians to observe the protocols, etc., etc. And in order for us to get to where we need to be, and if the opposition are looking at themselves as potential leaders, then they need to set the agenda, they need to set the pace, and they need to ensure that they encourage St. Lucians as much as possible to do the right thing. Because whether it's UWP or Labour that's in government, you still need to be vaccinated. You still need to observe the protocols. You still, need to do what you need to do. There are certain things that will not change irrespective of which government comes into office. And I think we really need to understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, caller, and please encourage your friends and your family as you go out to take the vaccine. Thank you, and have a good night.
You as well.
Okay, thanks. Here you have it, St. Lucia. We have somebody who called who said that they had a tattoo, this gentleman, and everything went well. So we have another call. Let me see if I can take that call. Hello, good evening. Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? We seem to be experiencing some issues with the cell phone. I'm not too sure why. But let me take that other call. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think 2 callers before this gentleman asked you whether in Creole, because I don't know the name of that thing, whether if he has this particular thing, whether he should take the vaccine.
Yeah.
What is the name of that thing in Creole?
I think they're calling it silver, what's it called? Quicksilver.
Oh, that, quicksilver.
Yes, quicksilver. Some people have quicksilver in the system for whatever reason and so forth.
That's strange. I've never heard about that.
You've never heard about the quicksilver?
Well, I know quicksilver, but I didn't know some people used to have that in the system.
Yes. Some people do have it in the system. I'm not sure I understand the reasons why.
Yeah, that's strange.
But some people do have it in the system, yes.
Okay.
But caller, can I ask you, have you taken your vaccines?
No, I have no intention of taking that.
Could you tell us why? I think I'm curious.
Well, the reason why I won't take it is I don't trust these European people. If Cuba brings it here, I will take it.
Okay.
These people that have done so many things to black people, injecting syphilis and all kind of thing in them,
right?
The Ebola and all these things, I ain't gonna take that.
But let me ask you a question. Did you take vaccines when you were a child? Did you take?
I have no choice. My parents gave it to me. I have no choice, and they said if you don't take it, the children can't go to school.
Right, but respectfully, if I were to say you're still alive, I don't think nothing has happened.
If they pass this law here, that I must take it, they'll have to arrest me. I won't take it.
Wow. You feel so strongly about it.
But if Cuba brings it here,
right,
I might take it.
Okay, but how will you encourage others to take it if you're not going to take it?
I'm not encouraging, not discouraging. I have 4 sons and a daughter, my wife. I have not encouraged or discouraged them. If they want to take it, they can take it.
But have they taken it? Has any of them taken it?
No, they haven't, and they haven't given me any. They haven't spoken to me, telling me they will or will not. I'm talking about, I'm 76 years of age. I'm married for 48 years, my second marriage.
Right.
My first son is 50, and my last child is 22. So if these people are adults, I can't tell them take it or don't take it. I don't have this kind of detective attitude towards my family.
Right.
And then most of them are married. Only 2 of them still lives with me. They still live at home. Most of them left my home when they got married.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe they are taking their cue from you as their father, because children do look up to their parents.
They haven't taken it. But to be honest, I have no intentions of taking it, and I'm not telling people to take it or don't take it. They have a choice, right? But my reason has nothing to do with some of the things I'm hearing, that back of the bees and this and that.
Right.
It's just that I don't trust the Europeans, period. And my reason for that is we have leprosy, HIV, hepatitis B, and all these things. And up to now, they haven't had a cure for it.
Right.
And this thing came 1 year after this thing started, and they said it's not a cure. It's I can't remember. It's not a cure.
It's a vaccine, because remember you have the flu.
Wear your mask.
Right.
So why should I take it?
Right. You have the flu like you have influenza. And whilst in St. Lucia, in the past, it has not been a big thing. In some of the European and the American countries, the flu is a deadly virus, to the extent that there is a flu shot that they give people every time the flu season comes around. So it acts as a preventative. It's not a cure, but it acts as a preventative. Now, if I were to ask you, in terms of your reservations with the vaccine and what your reservations are, how do you think, if majority of St. Lucians think that way and have that level of discomfort, how do you think we will achieve reopening our economy, reopening the various sectors, so people can go back to a normal way of living, that their livelihoods would not be so impacted? How do you propose that we move
Very
forward?
good question.
Yes.
What preventing us from, will prevent us from opening the places, people don't follow the protocol. People go in fetes, they go in crowds, they do everything, they don't wear their masks and so on. If they follow the protocol until this thing is over, we'll be all right. But even if they take the vaccine, you said, you still have to wear your mask, wash your hands, etc. And some people, hygienically, they don't care about hygiene, you know, and they don't care. Politics again, some people, they believe that if the Prime Minister say don't do that and they don't support his party, they don't do it. Do it, they don't do it. If the other side they don't do something and they support them, they don't do it also. So what I'm saying is this: if we believe in God as we say we do, we follow the protocol, believe in God, trust God, pray, and do the necessity. Don't eat junk. Don't use a lot of alcohol and all these things. We have to boost our immune system. I believe we'll be all right. But we don't do these things, you know. Now, I'll be honest, if I'm on medication,
right,
I have 2 things I'm taking, right? Now, I have no choice. I still don't trust it, but it assists me one place and affects me another place. And that is the thing about the vaccine, you know. They haven't really told me exactly what's the side effect of the vaccine. But as I'm saying, I am not telling people, I am in no position to tell people what to do or what not to do. It's just like I'm in no position to tell the Prime Minister when to call elections.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
So,
well, thank you very much for your frankness,
yeah,
caller.
but I admire you. I like what you're doing, and I appreciate the work the Prime Minister is doing. I think he's doing a very good job. I don't think anybody would. In fact, I don't wish I was in the Prime Minister's position at this time, because we didn't expect the COVID, the virus were coming at this time.
Right.
You know, and then under the circumstances, I'll be honest, I think he's doing a very good job.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
And you too, you're doing a very good job.
Thank you so much. I
Yes,
think the Prime Minister is listening, so I think he would appreciate that very much. And thank you for your frankness. Thank you very much to that caller. We have another caller. Wait on. Hello, good evening, caller. Oh, we're certainly experiencing some. Hello, good evening. Caller, can you hear me? Well, I don't think my viewers can hear you. I can hear you through the phone, but we're not hearing you through the system. So I'm not too sure what the challenge is. Okay. We have another call. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling tonight. Hi, good evening, caller. Can you hear me?
Hello, good night.
Hi, good night.
Yes, madam.
How are you this evening?
Moi bon, madame. Moi election moi samedi.
Oh, point samedi. Qui est-ce pour première et deuxième?
Dernière.
Première.
Dernière là.
Oh, point dernière, samedi.
Yes, madam.
Aha.
Dimanche, c'était mal, mais moi, dimanche. Je couche aujourd'hui.
Ah.
Et moi, levé lundi.
Oui,
ça allait aller bien, je pense.
Ok. Mais l'autre pour premier, c'était malmené comme ça?
Non, il pas fait moi rien. Puis, il a dit, moi, plus dernier avec plus fort. Oui, il a idée.
Ok. So, pour qui ça au point vaccin? Est-ce que ça dit nous pour qui ça au point vaccin?
Moi-même, je suis malade, moi, je suis COPD.
Right.
Elle va toujours autant news là bas et pour ni COPD et puis qu'on fini. So, moi, je dis pas, moi, qu'il fini.
Ok.
Moi, pour devant.
All right.
Oui, on fait ça.
Ok, well, moi, oui, merci pour ça, et moi, je veux encourager toute famille, tout le monde qui ça. Oui.
Donc, ça, il a coûté follow, moi, il faut le faire par point, il va y trouver.
Puisque, quand ça nous a dit, c'est, moi, ça, tout le monde ni réservation, yo, comme ici, à qui couille est allé là, moi, comprendre, moi, je veux comprendre, toute manière, tout le monde a catchilé, mais, nous pas ça rester manière nous y a pour tout le temps. Nous pas ça rester en state of emergency pour tout le temps. Nous pas ça rester en curfew pour tout le temps. C'est pas tout le monde. Là, il y a des gens qui pas aller faire pièce, ils rester la caillou, mais là, il y a des gens qui veulent aller dehors pour un petit fête, pour un petit bois, pour un petit marché. Right. So, mais c'est pas tout le monde qui m'aime. Et puis, nous n'y pour apprécier ça, pas tout le monde qui m'aime. Et puis, nous n'y pour faire ça, nous n'y pour faire pour payer nous, because c'est pas only about nous, mais c'est about neighbor, nous, about famille, nous, about ish, nous, about pays, nous, about économie, nous, about qui mène bail kay marché. Et puis si nous pas venir ensemble pour faire ça, bagay la pas kay marché bien, nous pas kay ça vie manière nous téye.
C'est ça même.
Oui. Mais merci en Chaiko.
Ouais, bonsoir, bon travail.
OK.
C'est bien.
Hello, good evening. We have another call. Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? Okay, we're not able to hear that caller. Hello, good evening, caller. Thank you for calling tonight.
Madame Nancy Bosway, ça va bien?
Bosway, moi là, Timiette.
Est-ce que vous-même avez un vaccin?
Est-ce qu'il est?
Est-ce que vous-même avez un vaccin?
Oui, moi, après tous les deux.
Et qui ça fait?
Il va faire moyen.
Ça fait rien?
Non, maintenant il a fièvre, mais ouais, là moi pour premier coup, ça moi fait, moi dit avant moi il a fièvre, moi bois des paracétamol, les moi point, moi caille moi dormi bien, moi lever bien, juste des pour là qui t'a fait moi un petit mal. Et puis là moi pour deuxième là, même bail là, moi juste point des paracétamol avant moi dormi et puis moi lever bien tout bail. So il pas fait moyen.
OK.
Mais est-ce que vous avez ça ou?
Non, moi pas.
Non, dis-nous pour qui ça ou pour quoi point?
Moi-même, on d'autres moi, et moi-même, on fait ma boîte ça. C'est not travel, Nancy. C'est OK ça?
Right.
C'est pas travel, on a des points.
Right.
Mais pas qu'est-ce que c'est ça pour ça pour?
Mais c'est pas, changer ça, moi, c'est pas pour travel vaccin là, hein? Vaccin là, si nous tout pas pour vaccin, nous quand pour continuer, tout le monde qui masque, tout le monde qui a 6 pieds, nous quand continuer ni state of emergency, nous quand ni curfew, nous pas aller out, nous pas aller pour un petit break, pas de nawacid, boti ka ba we a dormi no ça ou ka faire. Hein?
Qui mon qui dit ça ai pour boire.
Ou ka fait toujours, ou c'est ka fait. Mais ou ka casser protocole là garçon.
Non. Base là au bon toujours. Nous avons maintenir distance, nous avons
cette distance ou ka boire ti boire.
Oui.
Non mais il est important, c'est pas only nous ka pas là-bas qui sérieux. C'est pas vacciner, c'est pas only parce que moun vle travel. Ou comprendre, c'est pour ici même aussi, c'est pour nous ici pour assurer pour garder qui manière nous ça venir ensemble si plus moun qui ni vaccine plus safe ikaye, plus meilleur ikaye, et puis nous ça vie back to the way of life manière nous
ah oui, ça c'est opinion moi because maka le côté vous faire faire qui pas beaucoup moyen ba ça là ça. C'est opinion moi.
Mais de la la ka vinn joindre nous, de là on pas aller côté ak ba la ka vinn joindre nous.
Moi careful, na sanitize l'homme moi na la maka le bagay na toujours ouais masque réfugié moi. Là là c'est de côté na suivre ces bagay là. So donc on va que ben na henza.
Non mais est-ce qu'on y a raison pas pour vacciner?
Mon raison.
OK, on y a raison pas pour.
Mon raison moi.
OK, well.
Si pas dans moi, si c'est Cuba, 9.43.
Oh, si c'est Cuba, on va pour 43.
Right away.
All right.
Mais depuis que bagaille c'est Boussa qui a c'est nous bagaille qui fait peu de nous passe là. Non ça.
OK.
C'est mon n'est pas ça maintenant si demain au cas tu peux aller dans l'Amérique, n'est pas.
OK.
OK?
Eh bien, il s'en pour commencer par 2-3 trips pour faire.
Oui. Commencer pour avant. OK.
OK.
Take care.
Okay, thank you. Wow, St. Lucia. I know for sure that we have been getting some of those persons who have reservation. Let me see if we can get that call. Good evening, caller. Can you hear me? We seem to be experiencing some difficulties with the mobile. So if you wish to call, perhaps you can call the landline. But apparently we're having some difficulties with the mobile. Sorry, caller. I'm sorry. But as I was saying, yes, we seem to be getting reservations from persons in taking the vaccine. And I'm appreciating tonight what your concerns are. I know that persons from the Ministry and the Department of Health are listening, and perhaps some of the suggestions that you're making or the concerns and the reservations you have, they will seek to find a way to address it. Good evening, caller. Thank you so much for calling tonight.
Yes, madam. Moi encore. Moi dis que yo encore. Ou pas l'idée de les minibus driver qui vous prennent tout.
Mais c'est minibus driver qui a poigné. En chat c'est minibus drivers à poigné.
Moi puis l'on dit on pas battre parce que pas prendre.
Oui, yo ka point, ça c'est minibus driver ka point because ça qui fait la minibus drivers yo ni en go wis puisque différents moun ka monter en bus yo.
C'est pour ça moi vieux check ça, moi vieux ba chante encore.
Oui.
Et ça va wis là parmi tout et puis il pour nous même tout. Ouais.
En ça c'est minibus driver ha point et que ça nous ka encourager yo, nous voulons plus ces minibus driver point.
Oui, moi des fois yo point pour.
Oui, travail là yo ka faire sans go risk.
Ouais, c'est pour yo point.
Oui.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Yes, St. Lucia, vaccine reservations, apparently. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling tonight.
Hello, good evening, Nancy.
Hi.
Oh, I tried calling you on 3 occasions and couldn't get you, but as you said to change the number,
yes.
I've gotten through.
Yes.
I think it's important that we should take the vaccine. There was a gentleman who called and he was saying that the vaccine was created too quickly and whatever. Yeah, we have these reservations. But if you go to the supermarket and you observe the back of the boxes, you know the amount of ingredients in some of those products that we eat it?
Caller, I did not get an appreciation for reading the labels. I mean, normally I would read labels perhaps just to look at some of maybe the salt content and certain things. But until I started working in the manufacturing sector and I started understanding how to read the labels and the first item on the label is the grated because so the content of what's in the in those items is labeled from top to bottom. So the first item, the second item has the greatest content, and then I started reading. Then you have an appreciation of what goes into some of the food items that you buy. So clearly it's a risk that we're taking as well.
Yes, everything seems to be a risk, you know.
Yes.
Everything. Nancy, another thing is this. If we have 180,000 people in St. Lucia.
Yes, approximately.
We just have over 20, let's say 25,000 persons taking the vaccine. That means 155,000 people have not taken the vaccine. You see, we're still in trouble.
Yes, we are.
Because we will never get to normalcy. We will never go back on track. And another thing too, another problem I've noticed that will come up is this. Let's assume that you say you have your grandmother. Your grandmother has somebody who's taking care of her. That person is not vaccinated, but your grandmother is vaccinated. Everybody in the household is vaccinated, but the person who's taking care of her has not been vaccinated. You cannot tell the person to take the vaccine. What do? You drop the person? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there will be difficulty coming up. I can see that. There will be difficulty. I think, well, you cannot beg people to take it, but I think we try to influence. And one of the ways I think too, we need to upgrade or upstep the reaching out to people to take the vaccine. We cannot continue the way we're going, so soft and slow, and so we have to try and improve that, because if not, persons will not take it. They have their own opinions, and especially with all of what are they hearing on the radio, the TV, especially from the U.S. So we need to upgrade in St. Lucia, upgrade what's happening on the media so that persons will then understand what is going on. If not, Now, one thing, Nancy, I was speaking to someone who, in talking to me, he said to me, I'm going into something different. Huh?
Right.
He said to me, the EU gave St. Lucia millions of dollars to assist St. Lucians, to give St. Lucians. Where is that money? Nancy, I know that can never happen. But please explain to the people.
Did you listen to my program last week?
They keep on saying that as if that's their green tea.
Right.
Explain to them what's going on, okay, Nancy?
Did you listen to my program last week, caller?
No, I wasn't there.
So last week I dealt with the issue of funding, grant funding.
I will listen to you offline.
Okay, no problem. Last week I certainly dealt with the issue of funding and our source of funding, our loans, etc. I can't recall seeing the EU at all. So, caller, you can certainly say to your friend that we did not get any money from the EU with reference to COVID and our COVID response, nor did I see any borrowings from the EU as well with reference to our COVID and COVID response. So, certainly it's misinformation with reference to the EU and the COVID response. So it's 10 o'clock. We'll take our final call and before we end our program tonight. So let's just take our final call. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling. You're our final caller tonight.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I see a lot of people that basically think for themselves, right?
Right.
Think of you fall sick. An ambulance had to pick you up. A porter had to deal with you at the hospital, and then you're not vaccinated. I mean, you can easily pass on whatever you have.
And imagine they are not vaccinated as well, huh?
Yeah.
Imagine the porter and the ambulance driver is not vaccinated as well.
Exactly.
So if everybody makes up their mind and say, I'm not taking the vaccine, I'm wary of the Europeans or whoever, and so forth, and you do not take the vaccine, as I said to one of the callers, you may not necessarily go looking for it, but it may come to you. Circumstances may cause it or force it to come to you. Then what do you do then?
Yeah, and my observation is a particular set of people that support a particular party that is, have the how they call it, the doubt about the vaccine, as if it's a political thing, more or less.
Yeah.
And this is sad. This is really sad.
Caller, that is why I said initially that I do not believe that sufficient is being done by the members of the opposition to encourage, because it has taken party lines, unfortunately, which should not have been, but of course it has taken some sort of party lines. People who are intelligent enough has gone ahead and taken it, but some people still think it's a Shasney thing and a UWP thing, and I am taking it, etc. And so because of that level of misinformation, I think it's very important for the members of the opposition to encourage St. Lucians, not just their supporters, but to encourage St. Lucians to observe the protocols and to participate in the vaccination drive. I listened carefully to Dr. Anthony in his presentation a couple of days ago in Parliament, and I would have wanted to hear from him his encouragement and what he would do in his constituency, because he did indicate a lot of his constituents had reservations, and so it would have been important to hear from the opposition in terms of what their drive would be, what they would do to assist and to encourage persons within their constituencies and St. Lucians as a whole to participate and to take the vaccine.
As a matter of fact, he was more talking about people that have their doubts about it instead of encouraging them.
Yeah.
But even before they took it, they were saying that, okay, let the frontliners and whoever they go for it first and so on. And in the same breath, they went try to go to go secretly and took it about a day or two after, you know.
Yeah, so it's a strange thing. It's, I don't know. We'll get there eventually. We will get to the point where we realize and recognize that there are some things that transcends politics. That there are some things that you cannot politicize because the impact of it would be too great for you to politicize it. But thank you so much for calling. I'm Colin. I hope that you have taken your vaccine.
Well, I have taken. Well, actually, yesterday I took my second shot.
Okay, that's wonderful. And how do you feel?
Nothing as well. The only thing is where I had the injection.
In the shoulder, it hurts a little bit. It's a little sore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's soon. This too will pass. Thank you so much and have a good night. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much to our callers. I have a few messages, but it's after 10. And so I won't be able to read your messages. But St. Lucia, I took you back on a journey deliberately. I really wanted you to understand and to appreciate the work that the government has done in terms of our COVID response and our COVID management, and to show that the government has done its part. From day one, the government has continued to do its part. Now it is our time. It's time for us to do our part. If we want to go back to normalcy, I'm saying to young persons who are listening, I'm saying to adults, to parents who are listening, the only way that we can go back to some sort of normalcy is if we take the vaccine. And do not allow it to get to the point like my good friend who called me tonight to say that it's only if he has to travel, he'll take it. So what is forcing you to take it is the travel and not necessarily your own interest and the interest of your family, the health and safety and security of you and your family, but an external factor. I don't think we should allow us to get to the point where it is those external factors that forces us to take the vaccine. But I want you to sit down carefully tonight and I want you to appreciate that your government has done its part. It has ensured that it protected you, it protected your life, it protected your livelihood, it has protected the economy of St. Lucia, and now your government is calling on you, the Ministry of Health is calling on you to say, hey, it's now your turn. It's time for you to do your part. Go out there. Get correct information. And I'm not going to say get information. Get correct information because there's a lot of information out there. But most of the information, sometimes it's misinformation. And you know how they say bad news travel faster than good news. So when there was the instance of the blood clot, it was thought that it was the vaccine. That news traveled so fast and you just had a complete shutdown. Even some countries stopped the vaccination drive even before further investigation. But now that the good news is back, some people still believe it because it's the blood clot. Some people still believe it causes this and it causes that. The men believe that it causes some sort of dysfunction. There's so much misinformation out there. What I would advise you is to call your healthcare professional, read the correct information, read the right information on the vaccine, and do what is right. Do what is right by your family, do what is right by your friends, and do, most importantly, what is right by you. So I would encourage you to go out there, do your part, and get vaccinated. Thank you very much, St. Lucia, for being with us tonight. I hope that the information provided brought you back and reminded you of to where we're at and what we've done. Next week, I will see you again with another vibe full of facts and information. Hopefully next week, we're going to have a guest as well. And so we will have a real good time. Thank you so much and have a good night, St. Lucia. Thank you for those who've sent me messages, WhatsApp messages, and also on Facebook. Thank you so much for supporting and thank you for being here tonight. Have a good night and stay safe.
My MP said that we would have a new wellness center. Here we are. It's almost finished.
My community said we needed a new wing to our secondary school. And my MP said yes.
My sister said she needed help to find a job, so my MP created a job fair.
Our athlete said we needed better sporting facilities.
A new early childhood development center.
My neighbors said.
My sister said.
The children said.
Community said. Roads and a new park. And my MP said.
Yes.
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 Of course.
Nous tous, c'est yon famille en mi coup de nord. Et nous continuons pour faire progrès avec Antigel.
Moi, je remercie M. Ezekiel Joseph pour tout ça qu'il a fait en communauté. Côte-là, Chimé, community center, de l'eau, tout ça qu'il a fait, je remercie en Chaï. Il vient de journée à la bonne moyen, je vais poser ça. Je remercie un peu pour ça.
We're happy that Mr. Butch will be able to serve us to the extent and serve us very well, which I see to myself. That's someone that will be able to work for us.
Mr. Butch, I am wishing you the best of luck in the upcoming election. We love you. We are there with you. We are supporting you. And what can I say? I wish the United Workers Party all the best in that election.
Thank you, Butch. Thank you, my Prime Minister. We all love you. Yes. You have a vision. God give it to you. Yes. And you is the best Prime Minister we ever get in St. Lucia. Yes. Thank you.